Hello! Welcome to some yin yoga. So we're going to focus a lot on the hips. We're going to do a series of stretches where a strap would be really useful. So if you have a yoga strap, get one. If you don't have a yoga strap, you will be able to figure it out. But it will definitely make it easier if you do have one. So if you need to find that, grab that, and just put it somewhere nearby. We'll get to that in a little bit. I also have a couple of blankets. I have a big pillow, which if you don't have a big pillow, a couple of smaller pillows would do, or another like a thick blanket that you can roll up that will kind of be like a pillow. Or in place of that, you can use like a couple of yoga blocks, and that would work also. So that's the kind of stuff. I just gather some props around the edges. And then I've got them when I want them. We're gonna start with a butterfly pose, and you have two choices. One choice is to do the butterfly pose as a forward bend. And sometimes this is my favorite choice. I'm just testing it out for a moment, see how I feel about it. The other option would be to do it as a reclining pose. And I'm gonna leave the pillow here because I think I'm gonna do a reclining version. And I think I'm going to do this so it's a little bit of a back bend. So if you have a pillow or a couple of yoga blocks, and you can sort of put that underneath the top part of your ribs, under the shoulder blades, it'll sort of give you this almost like a fish pose kind of shape. Cobra upside down. Fish pose. If you're not familiar with the fish, it's basically Cobra upside down. Oh. And you can also just lie down with nothing underneath your back, right? So you can do just a regular reclining butterfly. It's delightful. All right, so once you've chosen for yourself what version of this is gonna feel the best to you, then the next part is relax. Now, if it's chilly, where you are, you can cover with a blanket. I've got that other blanket down there just for that purpose. You can add extra layers anywhere you like, so that you can be relatively still. Now, we're not holding ourselves still in a rigid sort of fashion. We're allowing ourselves to find some modicum of stillness. From time to time, if you want to adjust your body, move a little, come back to the pose, and find that stillness again. That's fine. Encouraged even. The question will be, are you fidgety? And for me, if I feel kind of fidgety, like I'm having trouble settling, that's a different category. So that's one kind of potential way the body might tell you that the pose is a little too deep. So you could add some support, like under the legs, under the knees, under your back, under your head. And you can cover the body, especially if you've got a nice heavy blanket. Sometimes that'll help you settle. And if that kind of helps take the fidgetiness away, then excellent. You can also come out of the pose if it shows up later on, right? Maybe near the end it starts to get fidgety. We're also trying to avoid any sort of burning sensations. Heat in a joint means that we're putting too much pressure there. And we want to avoid any sort of like numb, like electrically tingly, jolty sensations. Those are some kind of compression in the nervous system that you could just resettle the pose will usually take care of it, or a little bit of movement and then come back. So those are the strategies for kind of handling discomfort while we hang out here. We want the pose to feel like something. We don't want those kind of fidgety, burning, nummy kinds of sensations. It might feel like a stretch. It might feel like stress. It might, on the tissue, not mentally. It might feel like, like a little bit of pressure, but it shouldn't have those other qualities to it. Once we've got the body situated, then the next stage is relax the nervous system as much as you can, as fully as possible. Relax. Usually the body will follow suit and also the muscles will relax, but some won't because they're holding the pose. So we'll stay with this guy for about another 2 minutes or so. Come out in a moment, not yet, not quite yet, but we're going to come out of the pose really slowly. So sort of pay attention for a moment for these next few breaths and notice, like, what do you think you want to move first? For me, it's usually the legs, and in this case, also the legs, but you might need to move an arm first, or you might want to kind of move simultaneously, like over onto your side. If you're doing the seated pose, you might move your back first. So we'll take 2 more breaths. I'm just going to pick one thing, which for me is going to be straightening out my legs. You, it might be something different, but just kind of one little movement. You can have roll to your side, whatever it might be. And then when you're ready, do another little movement. You can stretch a little bit. Now eventually we're going to wind up laying on our back. So we might have another movement to do, or you might already be there. And I need enough room to stretch my arms basically over my head. So I'm just sort of wiggling myself into that position. So the arms don't have to be over the head. You can have your arms like a cactus. They can even be down lower. They can cross the body. I start with them over my head and then I sort of play with it based on how my shoulders feel. We're going to do a pose called the banana pose or the crescent moon pose, depending on who you ask. So stretch it out. We're just going to curve ourselves in one direction, sort of like a banana or a moon shape, kind of a, you know, real shallow crescent, just the teeniest little beginning of the new moon phase. Now one side of my body is stretching out longer and one side of my body's curling in, and I don't want there to be any sort of stitchy, crampy feelings on the curled inside. And I don't want there to be any problems on the other side, like in my knee or in my hip. If it feels too intense, you can definitely have less of a curve. The arms can change shape, like I said earlier, and then the legs can also do a couple of different things. You could cross one leg over the other, and I usually do the outer leg over the inner, the one on the inside curve. But I've seen people do it the other way. You might like it better that way. We're trying to let the hips kind of settle into the ground so one's not coming up off the floor, but if one is, and there's no way to comfortably settle that, you could tuck a blanket in or something under that hip if you like, so you can rest it a little heavier. You could also put something under the knees if the backs of the knees feel a little funky. And then you can turn the head a couple of different possibilities just to make the neck happy with the arrangement. Sometimes I like my head turned quite a bit, sometimes not at all. And we'll stay with this guy for about 2 more minutes, maybe a little tiny bit longer than that. Breath practice that we use during yin is kind of personal. You can do any breath practice that you like if you have a particular one in mind. I generally just try to keep the breath rhythmic and smooth. And sometimes I like to add just a little tiny bit of a hold of the breath at the very top of the inhale. So I inhale, hold just a bit, because the fullness of the pose kind of happens right there, like the tissue is as stretched out as it's gonna get. Especially on this pose, I could really feel that along the outer side of my rib cage and the outer part of my abdominal muscles. And so that little pause is kind of an interesting way to sort of feel the pose itself. And then the exhale kind of turns into an opportunity for all of that tissue to relax a little bit more. So I like that breath some of the time, and then sometimes just keeping a nice smooth breath pattern is the way to roll. I'll let you decide. We're going to do about 3 more of them. I'll let you decide. Like I have a choice. I'll suggest. You can do what you want. Sometimes I hear my own words and get a little bit entertained by my own self. Just gently sort of unwind this shape. I'm going to move my back, move my legs, just for a moment, sort of check in with how things settled. I am going to do some movement around my hips, but I like this kind of feeling of noticing, like, is one side that felt really stretchy also changed? Like, does that also feel weirder or different than the other side? And usually for me, it feels a little longer, a little different. Opposite side, same idea, just sort of curving things around, testing out how the shoulders should land and everything else. If you're not quite ready to do the other side, if it feels pinchy or uncomfortable, just stay a little longer without curving, and then when it feels a little softer, a little more inviting, go ahead and try, or go just a little bit, and then if it gets a little softer, a little more inviting, go a little bit more. You can incrementally kind of ease into some of these poses as well. You don't have to go all the way to the top volume of the pose right up front. Stay for about another 30 seconds or so. Take a big breath. And then unwind the pose as you're ready. See if you feel a little closer to even. Left to right. Top side to bottom side. Right, yogis. So we're gonna essentially kind of flip over for a Sphinx, but if you're not quite ready to do that, or if you want to add some in-between movements, you could do some little cat-cow shapes or something along that line. I'm gonna do like some little child's posy sort of movements first, and then come into the Sphinx. Oh, at least that's my plan. Not kneel on my own hair. Oh. These are sort of like child's pose and cat hat baby. It's my favorite thing lately. I do not know why, but it feels really nice. If you've not tried it, give it a whirl, see what you think about it. And we'll find ourselves in a Sphinx. Now, Sphinx can be quite a lot. So if I like my elbow, first of all, a little bit forward of the shoulder and a little closer than shoulders distance apart. It's just the most comfortable place to land. But you can also do a crocodile where you just kind of let yourself hang out, kind of resting either your chin or your forehead on your crossed forearms. And you can do kind of an in-between or like a slightly bigger version of that by putting a blanket or a pillow down. I'm going to smooth this out so it's not bumpy, if I can. It's being a little bit stubborn. Any bumpy like blanket areas are going to be like the Princess and the Pea. You're going to really notice it later. So you could do a little bit like that. So it's just a little bigger than not having the blanket there. But, you know, you can still do the crocodile or the Sphinx. Or you can push up onto the hands if you want to do more of a seal. So those are sort of the options here. You should just pick the one that you think is the best for you. Now, there's a tendency for my body, and for good reason, to want to engage really deeply through the legs and the glutes anytime I'm in a back bend like this. So I am trying to relax my legs and my glutes just so that the back bend is really located right in the spine, like my lower back. If it feels too intense, there's any sort of pinchiness, like any instinct that you have that says this is not good for you, I would listen to that instinct, because some people can have, and we can have like some disc problems and not be aware of it. That will show up, you know, as just feeling really, or some sacral issues, and not be aware of those until we hold a pose like this. So it's, you know, if you really are feeling kind of at all uncomfortable in that lower back, air for that lower profile. All of the benefits are going to be there without any of the trickiness. How's that? So we'll stay with this guy for like it's a little bit shy of another minute. And then we'll do some other stuff with it. About 3 more breaths. Now this is the first pose where I'm going to use the strap, which is we're going to come out of this and we're going to do a kind of frog variation where we do a double frog. One school of yoga, a frog pose, is mostly a quadricep stretch. The other school of yoga, the frog pose, is mostly a groin stretch. So we're going to do one of each. One leg is going to be focused around the quads, one leg is going to be focused around the groins. I love the combination. You can also just pick one and do just that one, whichever one you think is the best. I'm going to put my right leg into the quadricep stretch. So for that, I'm going to use a strap because it gives me multiple, like a range of sensation possibilities. If I hold onto my foot, I have one possibility because I can barely hold onto it. There's only one intensity level, and I would like to have multiple intensity levels. So that's up to you, how you think is going to be best. If you are able to hold your foot and still be able to pull the foot closer or let it go looser, definitely you could hold onto the foot and still have all those possibilities. Oh. Okay, so that's the one. I'm going to hold the strap kind of over my head, basically, or over my shoulder. And then the other leg, I'm going to kick out into like a little frog going out to the side. So that's my groin stretch. And as I level my pelvis, the groin stretch intensifies. To get away from that, I can roll to the other leg, right? To deepen the quad stretch, I draw my foot closer to my hip, or take the foot away to lighten up on that load. The Sphinx can be done, or you can also kind of add that crocodile back in. And I'm going to do a crocodile with a pillow, just so there's somewhere in between. Okay. So kind of find your speed with this. We're going to stay for about 4 minutes. I'll give you a halfway point, and a kind of last minute or last, 45 seconds, somewhere in that range, so that you can, like if you want to leave early, you have you'll have some signposts along the way to give you some notions of how the pose feels and whether you should stick around or not. It's okay to leave a pose early. All right. doing as I'm hanging out here again is I'm relaxing as deeply as I can through my whole nervous system, right? Really letting my body as best I can just sink toward the floor, relaxing my face, all the muscles around my jaw, my mouth, my eyes, relaxing my shoulders, those places where I often carry a little bit of stress. We're about halfway through. And then if the pose gets a little lighter, there's not as much sensation. And for me, the groin is not as big a deal as the quad, so I'm mostly kind of judging based on that. But for other people, the groin stretch is going to be the big deal here. So if it gets a little lighter, I just give it a little tiny bit more intensity. You can also just stay with an intensity that feels interesting. You don't have to increase. You are allowed to decrease. It's your pose. Stay for around 1 more minute. Take 2 more breaths. Now I'm going to release this quadricep stretch first. So with that exhale, I'm going to let that one go nice and slow. And then I'm going to release this one by lifting myself off the floor and straightening that leg out. I do that so that I'm not dragging the knee along the floor. You can come out of the pose that way, but I find it's more likely that I'm going to injure myself if I'm dragging myself against the resistance of my mat, and less likely if I'm in space. if the limb is out in open space, there's less likelihood that I'm going to injure myself coming out of a pose. So that is why I err on that, in that direction. But I have also come out of yoga poses many times and not injured myself. So the one time I injure myself is usually the one that, makes me change my pattern. Now I like the feeling of the 2 hips here. There's really different sensations, having done quite a different stretch in each hip. This, the hip itself kind of right up here in the front of my hip in the socket itself. This just feels really soft and delightful. The leg itself just feels really relaxed. On the other side there, it feels longer. The quadricep stretch definitely had an interesting impact there. And there's a kind of nice, pleasant sort of effervescence, a lightness to my thigh, the top of my thigh, that I find really nice. So I'm going to take another couple of breaths, and then I'm going to set myself up for the other side. If you want, you could do a child's pose or some little cat shapes first, and then you can come into the other side when you're ready. I often kind of lean into like little fluid, kind of jiggly movements. It's usually more my speed when it comes to coming out of these poses. sit up on the other side. And again, kind of let myself sink in. We'll stay for a few minutes. If you need a little bit longer to get yourself settled in, that's fine. Once you're in the pose, relax, breathe. I'll give you some signposts. We're about halfway through, yogis. Stay for just a little bit less than a minute more. Take 2 more breaths. And with the exhale, we're going to let go of one side if we're doing both. And then the other side. Again, you have some options for whatever you want to do to unwind the pose. You can just lay down. I'm going to do that for a couple moments. And then I'm going to do a little, like a child's pose-ish kind of shape. We're going to meet up in a seated position in about a minute and a half or so. Give yourself that time to unwind, kind of release the pose from your nervous system, from your deep tissue. We let the pose go with all the surface muscles. But you might still feel kind of a little impression left behind there. Oh, I definitely feel an impression left behind in the back, so rounding the back like that, oh, feels really weird compared to that sort of back bendy shape. That feels a little more normal, which is not usually the case. It's part of the fun, I think, of yin, really. It's kind of feeling how like we slow it down enough that we can really feel how the body sort of holds on to a pose or lets go of a pose over time. Assumes a pose. All right. Now we're going to start with a V, but it doesn't have to be as wide as you can go. And you can also bend one knee in a second when we get to one side. We're just going to start with the V. Now there's a gap right here underneath my knee joint, and that can be a little vulnerable. So for me, I fill that gap with a blanket. So I'm going to take a blanket and roll it up. And I just use one blanket for the whole thing. It just goes down the center of my knee line there, but you could do a pillow under each knee, and that, especially if maybe your hips don't want to sit upright, that might be nice, having like more of a bend here. You can also sit up on the edge of a blanket so that it feels a little bit more like your hips are elevated a little higher than your feet. Sometimes that makes for a really nice sort of V shape. It just feels a little better, a little more aligned. So you don't feel like you're leaning backwards. Now, we're gonna start with a really simple twist. We're just gonna turn toward one leg and then hang out. So I'm gonna go left first. I have really short arms. So I'm gonna give myself some little arm rests. Places for my fingertips to rest. It makes it a little easier. And what I want to avoid is like overdoing things with my neck. I just want to let my spine spiral. This plant behind me and I are having an interaction. But I just want to let myself sort of spiral as much as my vertebrae want to turn all the way through. So not overdoing the neck, not underdoing the ribs, but letting each vertebrae just kind of find its appropriate amount of rotation. And then letting my arms find a rest that feels comfortable and soft in the shoulders. So I'm not overdoing it with the arms, right? I'm just gonna let this sort of spiral of the spine be the pose. And some spines are different than other spines, and sometimes like one side turns quite a lot, the other side doesn't turn as much. Sometimes they're both pretty much the same. You may find that like one of your sit bones, like your hip wants to help, so it's sort of leaning off of the center line. See if you can bring yourself right there to the center where both sit bones are even. And the twist is just whatever your spine will do. Stay with this for about four more breaths. Now, whatever degree you turn toward, whatever direction you turn toward, that's the leg that you're going to work with. So I'm going to fold towards my left leg because I turned left. So you could, if you're going to do the same thing, you could bend the right knee, right? And put that leg in a different position, and vice versa. If you're going to the right, you can bend your left knee. So I'm just gonna fold over this left leg. If you want, you can turn yourself, like turn the ribs a little more to the inside or a little more around to the outside. I'm just gonna see if I can set them down on top here. Give myself some little arm rests. You can also sort of get a couple pillows or something and give yourself some place to rest your head if you want. And then I'm sort of trying to shift my hips back to neutral, so I'm not leaning out of my right sit bone too much. That puts the stretch into my back. So I feel the stretch coming from like down here, all the way up my back and up through the skull here, which is nice. But it can be a sensitive area, so I'm just allowing that to sort of happen through relaxing into it. I'm not pushing that. Just go a little bit longer here. Take 2 more breaths. Now the second breath, I'm going to take a really big, deep inhale. Hold that in and come all the way up. And as I get bigger lung capacity, I'm just inhaling on the way up. I'm going to let all that air go and come out of that twistiness. I'm going to bend my knees as while I'm kind of letting everything unwind, just to have a difference there. Now I still feel like I'm turning in that left direction, so I'm not going to go anywhere near the second side until that unwinds itself. Now, usually that takes somewhere in the like 35 to 55 seconds, that kind of a range. Sometimes with the yin, because we hold it longer, it takes more like a minute, a little bit. I'm already feeling it unwind itself, so the discs are basically just absorbing fluid and reassuming their neutral shape. When we do a twist, we kind of push a little bit of the fluid out of the disc, and then they rehydrate. I think I'm simplifying the process, but anyway, it's kind of like that. All right. So I'm pretty close. I feel like I can do the first part of this. So I'm gonna assume this sort of V shape again. Again, I'm just gonna do a sitting upright twist. I'm noticing already I'm being a little pushy with my hips, so I'm gonna unwind that a little bit. This side, I twist less than I twist the other direction. It's just a little bit different range of motion. And sometimes I'll try to make it even, so I really have to pay attention. Like right now I'm dragging my arms around, so like noticing that collarbone movement and resettling my arms. So I'm not being pushy in that direction. Just pushy enough, not too pushy. Trying to feel how the twist is a movement of the spinal column rather than a kind of forcing or pushing from the hip or a forcing or pulling from the shoulder. I mean, it's just a oblique, muscle movement emanates right up my center, right up my core. I'm using that word to describe more the spine than I am the like abdominal muscles, although that they are the muscles that move our spine around. So it's apropos either way. Watching my tendency to overdo the neck. We're going to stay like just shy of another minute. Fold myself forward. So again, I'm just going straight over the leg. You can add a little change. You can bend this other knee. You can change the position the arms are in. I'm just going to give myself some arm rests. Noticing, like, am I pushing it all from my hip, or am I just allowing everything to sort of settle and ground a bit here? I'm going for more grounded feeling than pushy. Letting gravity do some of the work here. We'll stay for one more minute. Take a nice big breath. Let go with an exhale. And then we're going to inhale our way up. So as you unfurl, keep drawing the air in. Your lungs are able to expand. Once you're all the way upright, let the air go. And then we'll see. Give ourselves whatever time we need to reassume normal. A neutral, normal, regular, the way it often is, spine. Now, we're gonna do a little sequence. There'll be a swan pose, and then there'll be a twist, a reclining twist, and then there'll be a hamstring stretch. I'm gonna do the Swan Pose as a reclining Swan Pose that sort of has some flavors of a supported bridge pose and a swan had a baby. Okay, I'm gonna use this pillow under my hips. So there's a little bit of an elevated hip so I can get the extension in my hip flexor that you get from a regular swan. You can substitute a regular swan in place of the shenanigans I'm about to do on my back. So if for whatever reason you think it will be better for you to do just a regular swan, you can do that pose. And just as a reminder, the swan is similar, same thing as the pigeon, except more relaxed, right? So often with the pigeon, we're sort of picking ourselves up, kind of gripping with the inner thighs, pulling ourselves up away from the floor a little bit. In this case, we're sinking down toward the floor. So one leg is straight out behind us. That gives us that hip flexor area, and the other leg is going to come closer to the chest and be bent. So we're going to do this exact same shape, just upside down. That's what I'm going to do. And I will invite you to the same thing if you would care to. Okay. The strap might come in handy for part of this. So I'm going to have that nearby. That'll be for the hamstring stretch portion. And for the portion where I am elevated up on this pillow, I also find that it's helpful for me to have something to support my shoulders. So I'm going to use a blanket for that. Okay, so I'm going to put a blanket down, and my shoulders are going to lay on this blanket, and then this is going to be under my hip, and then I'm going to put my legs in the position here. Okay. So I'm going to play with it a little bit so that I like where I land. I like the pillow to be more under my hips and not under the curve of my low back. I'm going to do my left leg first. So I'm going to leave the right leg kind of stretched out and hanging out like that. You can put your right foot on the floor if this is too much. You can also do this without the pillow, right? Just lay on the floor. It's fine. It's nice. It might be desirable. And then I'm going to bring this guy in and hang on to it. Now, I can hang on with my hands, or I can take my strap and make a loop here. And I have a yoga strap with a buckle, so the loop is possible. And the loop goes from my foot to just down the length of my shin, basically, from the arch of my foot to around the top of my thigh. And I just pull it tight. And then I can hold on to the strap instead of holding onto my leg, right? If I want a little more relaxed way to hold this, I can do it that way. You can also bring the leg a little more toward the middle, which is what I'm gonna do. And then that gives me a little more spicy sensation over this, in this outer hip. For me, going out to the side is a little less spicy, less interesting. Toward the middle, more spicy, more interesting. So I'm bringing my knee as close to the middle as it feels like it's gonna go. And then letting this guy just relax. All right, friends, so we're gonna stay here for like another 3 minutes or so. Somewhere in that neighborhood. Oh. For me, the right hip flexors are definitely a little tighter than the left, so I'm feeling that down the front of my right thigh. It's like more like right in here, right? That's where I really experience the hip flexors, is in the bowl of my pelvis, lower back, front kind of inner pocket of the hip, like not this little guy over here, but like more where the pocket kind of lives if you put your hand in it. just shy of 1 more minute here. In a moment, but not quite yet. When we transition this thing into a spinal twist, if you're doing the regular swan, you know, the first one I demonstrated, then this is the point where you can kind of come onto your back. Swing your back leg around, and you can kind of roll onto the back. For me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let go of this leg. I'm going to put it on the ground and lift up just enough. Oh, maybe. And if I don't push myself backwards, to get the pillow out from under there. And then I'm taking the leg kind of over to my right. So I'm still working with this same hip. So whatever was the front leg in your swan, that's going to be the leg that's up on top, if you were doing the regular version. Oh, and then we're going to hang out here for about 2 minutes. And we'll do the hamstring stretch for about 2 minutes. And then we'll do the other side. Oh. If you've never tried this, try this. Take a blanket and tuck it into the small of your back while you're doing this twist, and then sort of lean into it. Oh, it's delightful. It just feels really nice. Oh. Strap ready. We're going to use the strap for the next pose so you can kind of have it in your hand. So you're ready to go. You don't have to, though. You can pick it up later. It's the inkling that my brain has to plan for the future. That's what's happening over here on my mat. Oh, goodness. We're going to stay for 1 more minute. All right, yogis, I'm going to take that blanket out from behind my back. I'm going to put this little strap on this left foot, and then I'm going to the center. And I'm just going to give my hamstrings a couple minutes worth of love. Now, my strap is long enough that I can sort of put it underneath my back. Get my hair out of the way so I don't pull it. And then I can let go and just let the strap hold itself up. But if you've got a shorter strap, that may not be possible. You can certainly give it a whirl, but you can hold it in the hand. You know, if it's just barely sticking out of the side, you can hold it in your other hand. It's just a little easier than hanging onto it up here, but you can still hang onto it up there. It's not the end of the world. It's only 2 minutes. It could be longer. Oh. I'm sort of letting my legs just lean into the strap. So you could give it more room, like you could lean down farther. You just make sure that it feels like the sensation of that stretch or stress, whatever you want to call that sensation, is sort of spread out over the leg. It doesn't feel like it's just right at your butt bone or right at the back of your knee. It sort of encompasses, for me it's both calf and hamstrings. For you it might be just your hamstrings. So we're just going to stay for just a little bit shy of 1 more minute. Just kind of doubling up on some of the stretches we've done with our hips today. Did a little bit of inner thigh a couple times. We did some hip flexors a couple times. Outer hip a couple times. Now we're just coming circling back around to our hamstrings one more time. All right, yogis, so we're going to take a nice big breath, and then we're going to let that stretch go. I'm going to give myself a little moment to unwind. And if you're doing the regular swan, this is a point after you unwind, you can just go into the swan on that other side. I have to kind of reposition my hips up on this pillow. So I'm gonna make that happen. Let the left leg just rest out there now, and then bring the right foot into working. And again, we'll stay here for like the rest of the minute that we're in the middle of, and then a couple more after that. Just about done here. We got about 4 or 5 breaths more. Big breath. And I'm going to slowly kind of transfer this into a twist with this right leg up on the top. So we keep kind of stay in this kind of outer hip territory, but maybe it broadens out a little differently down the leg or up the back, and you know, in a pleasant way. Not an unpleasant way. We'll hang out here for a couple minutes. Oh. a wee bit longer, so I'm just going to get my strap handy so I can take one more big breath. And then I'm going to come out of there and put that strap around the ball of my foot and bring it underneath my back. Okay, I'm just going to kind of play with this until I find that stretch that feels like it covers the back of my thigh in a really nice way, not an unpleasant way. And then I'm going to lean into it. Just let this leg kind of hang into the strap. I've got hold of it just in case. Again, once you're in the pose, you just let go and relax. We'll stay a little bit longer. By let go, I mean let go with your nervous system. Let go of trying to control everything. That's hard for me. Let yourself just be present. So just shy of one more minute. Yogis. So I'm gonna unwind this. Set that guy off to the side. Now I'm already kind of in position here. I've got this pillow pretty close. I'm gonna put that under my legs. I'm gonna cover up with this big blanket. And we're just gonna take a moment to relax. Let everything soften. So the last pose is not meant to be spicy. No edge. just relax. This one's all for our nervous system. So we just let the nervous system relax, soften all the muscles in your face. Make sure the hips feel soft, relaxed, and the low back feels comfortable. So you don't have to fidget there. Get your arms in a position that you like. You can put the arms over the torso. They could go far out to the sides or hug in a little closer, but just let them relax, whichever is the right amount. So the shoulders let go. There's no tension in your armpit or across the chest or the upper back. Just let everything soften. Please just notice your breath again for a moment. See if you can feel the breath kind of moving the body all the way to the fingertips or the tips of the toes. One more deep breath. Let go with a sigh. When it seems like a good idea, you can wiggle and stretch fingers, toes, wrist, ankles. We are going to eventually arrive at a seated position. You don't have to rush, but that's where we're going. Oh. Thank you so much for joining me for some yin. Hopefully your hips will feel amazing when it's all said and done. Take a nice big breath. And a big deep sigh. Namaste, friends.